Hey everyone, welcome back to the Critic-Verse. Today we're going to be doing another breakdown and review for Superman Lois, Season 3, Episode 3, titled In Cold Blood. Now, before we get to the video, like, comment, and subscribe to join the Critic-Verse and to expand the community that I'm trying to build. Now, let's get to the breakdown. In the first scene, the episode begins with Clark awakening to Lois screaming for him as he flies up above Earth's atmosphere where he can locate her in Metropolis. As the city starts to crumble around him, when he finally reaches her, she's in front of the Daily Planet as he tries to reach her but fails and wakes up, only to realize it was just a nightmare. Even Superman gets them. In the next scene, we get Lois in another montage with her revealing to the other characters associated with the main cast and a voiceover phone call to Lucy about her recent diagnosis. We then get to see Chrissy, the Cortezes, the Irons, and General Lane's reaction to this devastating news. Lois tells Clark she wants to get Chrissy up to speed the next morning on her Bruno Mannheim investigation. This worries Clark since Lois has her first chemo appointment today, and she says she's not going to sit around and wait until then. They go to the kitchen where the boys have made Lois her favorite breakfast because they learned that chemo can affect one's appetite. John Henry is having Lana and Sarah add voice and facial data to his new security system he put in last episode, and I don't think it works, but we'll get to that later. Sarah is angry she got grounded and Nat didn't, but Nat never lied about the party, and Lana wants Sarah home right after her dinner with Kyle. Lana talks with John Henry about parenting, which leads to talking about Lois, to which John Henry says it must be difficult, but this Lois isn't his wife. In the next scene at the Gazette, Lois is catching Chrissy up on the investigation and tries to find a connection with the new info provided from Judge Reagan. Chrissy finds the connection with inmates being treated by the same physician that was suspected to have ties with Intergang, and they go to find his whereabouts. We do see a photo, and it is the same guy that we've seen with Bruno and Onomatopoeia. Meanwhile, Clark is at the chemo clinic calling Lois and not getting an answer. The receptionist says they have to give up her seat to someone else, and that this is typical for first-time patients. Lois and Chrissy find a recently abandoned medical lab since the electricity still works, and they find a blood splatter that Lois takes a sample of. Chrissy wonders next why Clark is texting her, and Lois reveals she missed her appointment. When Chrissy realizes it's her chemo appointment, she's pissed at Lois and tells her to respond to Clark and reschedule her appointment right in front of her. As Clark gets the text, Sam stops by with a post-chemo care package and really gives Clark the riot act about letting Lois skip chemo for an investigation, and that they have to work together on this. Next, the boys, Sarah and Nat, are at the diner talking about Lois, and Nat suggests getting a gift. The boys reject the idea, noting that past experiences, Lois just returns everything. But Nat already has something in mind, something that Lois can't return. Candace is revealed to be working there as a waitress, and after she says John told her about Nat and her new possible love interest, it's revealed John didn't tell her about Liza, and he tries to use Lois as an excuse, to which Jordan shoots that down. And the group all want John to be honest with Candace. Next, Lois is giving Clark an excuse on how she missed her appointment, and Clark says the story doesn't matter over her health, and everyone is worried about her. She says Bruno is her white whale, a Moby Dick reference, but not to worry. She's already rescheduled, and Clark says this time he's going with her. Sarah is having dinner with Kyle, complaining about being the only one grounded out of all 4 teenagers, but Kyle says she is the only one that lied about where she was going. When she talks about the new security system, Kyle is suspicious because he doesn't know about John Henry's backstory or his credentials. At the Irons residence, John Henry is analyzing footage of onomatopoeia from their attack, trying to figure out how her powers work exactly, and Nat asks her dad if they could give Lois a watch that Nat made for their Lois, which then John Henry gets defensive about te- and tells her to do what she wants because it's her watch and goes back to his work. Jonathan drives Candace home after her shift, and as he tries to tell her about Eliza, Candace's father interrupts and starts making them uncomfortable. After Candace goes inside, he starts inquiring about John's truck, what it costs, and John says it was a gift, and gives John a weird look as he leaves. Next, Clark has the same nightmare as before, but he isn't quite as fast enough to reach Lois this time around, and then wakes up. Next, they're in the waiting room at the clinic. Lois and Clark switch seats because Lois is uncomfortable, and Clark tries to ignore a mudslide in Nepal, but Lois tells him to go and he agrees. Nat and the boys are admiring the watch as Nat engraves all their names on it. John Henry tells them that Nat made it for their mom. They ask if her dad is cool with it, to which she notes that it's her decision and that they have to go to school. Back at the clinic, Lois begins to spiral at the sights and sounds of the clinic's waiting room and tries texting Chrissy for updates, but after Chrissy lies, she goes to confront her. Lois shows up in Chrissy's car as she stakes out a suspected intergang lab, noting Lois missed 2 appointments in 2 days. When she says she saw a couple of guys moving stuff out of that particular lab, Lois says they should take a look inside before they get back. At the mayor's office, one of Lana's subordinates that we met last season says the people want answers about the attack, and Lana says she told them everything the DoD says she can. Kyle shows up under the guise of checking up on her, but he really wants to know what's going on between her and John Henry, which upsets Lana, and she thanks Kyle for the coffee, which is cold, for asking him to leave. After the mudslide, Clark returns to the clinic only to find out Lois skipped out on another appointment, and he is pissed. At the lab, Lois is ignoring Clark's calls, and the men come back, and they hide in a freezer filled with blood bags. Creasy suggests calling Clark, but when Lois triggers the ELT, nothing happens, to which Lois theorizes that no signal can get out since the freezer might be reinforced. At the DoD, Superman tells Sam and John Henry Lois is missing, which triggers an argument between him and General Lane, but John Henry interrupts and sets them both back on track. At the high school, Jonathan bursts in and informs Jordan, Nat, and Candace his truck is missing. Jordan says he left the watch inside. John tells Candace her dad may be responsible, which pisses Candace off, but Jordan and Nat agree with him, and they want to get it back themselves. To take her mind off of their situation, Chrissy wants to talk about Lois' situation, how she's sick but refusing treatment, using the case to avoid her fear. Just then, they hear the men get closer. Next, Lana returns home asking Sarah what she says to Kyle. Sarah starts giving Lana attitude. Lana tells her to be mindful of what she says about her to her dad, and this starts an argument where Sarah blames Lana for Kyle cheating, and Lana gives Sarah one hell of a slap, which she earned in my opinion. She goes to her room as Lana realizes her mistake. Nat and the boys find the chop shop, and they plan how to get the watch back. And John says, can't Jordan just speed in and beat everyone up? But Jordan says they'd have to take out the cameras, something he learned from General Lane back in last season. But Nat has a different idea. Back at the lab, one of the Intergang members opens the fridge to find Lois standing there alone. He tells her to exit at gunpoint, and then Chrissy triggers the ELT and Lois yells for Superman. Clark hears her at the DoD and rushes to her in a scene that mirrors his dreams. He rushes to her and tells her to get somewhere safe and to call the DoD. Just then, one of the Intergang members fires kryptonite lasers at him, knocking him over. In my favorite scene of the episode, back at the chop shop, after Nat launches in a smoke grenade, we get sort of a one-shot of Jonathan running in to find his truck, and Jordan and Nat keeping anyone away from him as he drives his truck out of the warehouse. Clark is continuously getting hit by the kryptonite lasers, and John Henry throws his hammer, damaging the lasers. And when they look back, they see the man has triggered an explosive device, destroying the whole lab, but they escape unscathed. Next, Clark is angry at Lois, yelling about the situation she and Chrissy were in, and Lois is angry for being treated like she's fragile, and starts to break down that she isn't, and all she's about to go through with chemo. General Lane calls Lois to talk about the blood sample they found, and it turns out the blood belongs to Clark. After, in Bruno's secret lab, the doctor says Henry Miller has reached his limit and that the experiment is over. The fixer from last week's episode suggests that they find someone else that they can push further, as Henry Miller violently rages against the tank. Back at the farm, the teens can't find the watch, but Candace shows up and revealed she did find the watch in her dad's things, and that John was right about him. She tries to end things with him, saying that she's brought nothing but trouble, but he doesn't let her, and presumably he tells her about the Eliza incident while it cuts to the next scene. We see Lana outside Sarah's room trying to apologize for the slap and just wants Sarah to come out, saying that she doesn't want to be like her mom. But from the next scene, it turns out Sarah isn't even in her room. At the diner, Kyle is eating and Chrissy asks to join him, where she tells him about her day and doesn't understand what's going on with Lois. And Kyle says he understands since his dad died of liver cancer, and that how his dad didn't want to admit that he was sick until it took him. Chrissy asks Kyle if he wants to come back to her place, but he has to rain check after Sarah comes in tears. In the final scene the next day, Clark takes the keys and says he's driving, to which Lois makes a joke about his driving. Once they get on the porch, everyone is waiting for her and they present her with the watch. The boys talk about how the watch was made and functions, and John Henry apologizes to Nat about how he's been acting. Lois and Clark get in the truck, and Lois is finally ready to head to chemo. So we continue this week with another heartfelt and touching episode as Lois continues her cancer journey in the storyline. The episode is titled In Cold Blood, which is probably a reference to the literal cold blood Lois and Chrissy find in the Intergang Lab's freezer, which turns out to be Clark's blood. How'd they get his blood? No clue. How did they get so much? Also, very good question. Hopefully the reveal pays off. A couple of thoughts I have on this episode. Sophie, Lana and Kyle's youngest child, is mentioned, but not shown once again, even later in the day, which is a common theme around this character, but it's probably because the actress is so young that they're not allowed to use her as much, per child labor laws. Lois putting off 2 of her chemo appointments wasn't surprising, even the second one when she was already at the clinic, because as soon as Clark left, you knew that she was going to leave too. Clark's recurring nightmare wasn't exactly addressed, but was sort of calmed in this episode, because when he rescued her, it looked just like his dream, but the city wasn't crumbling, and he was able to reach her in time. My favorite scene in this episode was the teen's action scene with the one shot. And even though John did get to participate, I still hope he gets powers, because I'm not really a fondness of the human characters really in a superhero show, even though they're supposed to be an audience surrogate. So I still hope John gets powers, and that this wasn't all the action he sees. And now, I may have an unpopular opinion on a particular scene/character, but here it is. In my opinion, Sarah deserved that slap. Now, I'm not saying that the slap was the right thing to do, but boy did she deserve it. Now, I'm glad Lana felt remorseful about it as well, but she was saying some pretty awful things to her mom. Hopefully, she sees where she went wrong and doesn't just leave it as a one-sided apology looking for it from her mom. Okay, well that's all the thoughts I had for today. See you next time for more breakdown and reviews for Superman and Lois Season 3, or on any other video I do on the channel. And thanks for joining me in the Critic-Verse.